I don't think you can lead effectively in this day and age, in a world in which emotional connection is required, right? Between those who lead and those they lead, right? Emotional connection is required. And you show your best connective tissue through story.
Welcome to Start With a Win, where we unpack franchising, leadership, and business growth. Let's go.
How does high performance and teamwork in sports translate into the corporate and business world? Today, we talk about that on Start With a Win. Coming to you from Area 15 Ventures and Start With a Win headquarters, it's Adam Contos with Start With a Win. You're in for a treat today. Our guest is Don Yaeger, a great friend, a master storyteller, and a leadership guru who has authored 12 New York Times bestsellers and collaborated with legends like Walter Payton and John Wooden. Don's journey from a Sports Illustrated editor to a sought-after corporate coach has given him a unique perspective on leadership. He's now the host of the Corporate Competitor podcast, where he chats with Fortune 500 executives who once dominated the playing fields. With guests like Condoleezza Rice and Netflix's top executives, Don explores how sports principles fuel business success. Get ready to gain insights from a man who's seen the playbook of champions both on the field and in the boardroom. Don, welcome to Start With a Win.
Adam, I would come back every day if you'd invite me. It's there's no better conversation to have than one with you.
Awesome. I want to start by a huge congratulations for your induction into the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame that just happened in August. I'll tell you, that is a huge accolade, and I mean something that you've been speaking publicly for quite some time, and you're masterful at it. So huge congratulations to you, and thanks for all you do to deliver your messages.
Thank you. What it means, it's one of those moments when they called a couple of months ago to let me know that it was that I was being inducted. I, dropped the phone. It was, because you just don't expect. It's not something you expect. So it's pretty cool.
Well, and it's a peer review. So right. I'll tell you, the top speakers in the world are very critical. You've got the best of the best who are saying, Don Yaeger, he's the guy. And I mean, you're sharing the stage with just a very few, very top people. So that's incredible. Congratulations,
Thanks, Adam.
My friend.
I appreciate you, buddy.
Let's jump into this. I mean, sports, leadership, storytelling. I mean, you've got a lot of great things here.
All of which tie into everything you talk about. It's funny. I read your podcast. I read your blog. Listen to your podcast, and I love that. I do. I regularly resonate with different things that you're hitting on, and so that's why I love these conversations.
Thank you. All right, let's go back to kind of the foundation for this. I mean, it's hard to get up and tell stories if you don't necessarily sit in a position of experience or leadership. I mean, you just can't make up stories and BS your way through it. So, what do you see as the key foundation for leadership that you've watched transition over that works for sports and for large businesses that has been very effective?
Well, I tell you, Adam, and you and I talked about this previously as we were doing some work together. It was this idea that most people don't know their audience very well. They don't know enough about them to know how to stimulate them, how to actually get the audience engaged with them. And so one of the lines I use all the time is, nothing makes someone more interested in you than when they find out you've taken time to be interested in them, right? So show interest in your audience, learn something about them before you actually tell them a story. If you can in some way make yourself attractive to them, your story will be heard differently. But then the second piece of it is that most storytellers fail by not having a good a well-defined call to action. And a lot of people think that's a business phrase, right? It's a term. It's a boy, we're going to close a deal here. Actually, call to action means, what do you want them to do, feel, or think when they're done listening to you? And a call to action can be important even if the story you're telling is over a dinner conversation, right? It's like, I want you to maybe want more time with me. That may be my call to action. But can I make sure that that's abundantly clear and don't leave call to action. No, as you know, as a sales guy, you never leave your call to action in question. You never leave it hanging out there as a hope that they heard me. No, you make it clear. And someone says, "Boy, that was a great dinner, and you're a great storyteller." You're like, "Boy, you know what? Let's have more dinners because I got more stories. Let's do this." And you're making sure that the call to action is clear.
It seems like that is really the foundation for leadership also, though, is to create actionable futures.
Right. I could tell you a story, but if at the end of it you're going, "Wow, that was a great story," and that's the end of what you say, then, by the way, what did I do? I might as well have just been sitting at a campfire with the s'mores, right? With a marshmallow on a stick. At the end of the day, what I really want is for you to do something because I told you the story, to think something, to believe something, to want to follow me, right, where I'm going. And so, but again, too many people leave that to chance. They hope that you're gonna define or divine the lesson, when the truth is that's a really dangerous prospect.
So how do we stimulate the desire within somebody while we're telling the story? Because we have to connect with them, obviously, and we have to put them in the shoes of somebody in the story somehow, so that they want to take that action. I mean, is there some psychological principle or some way that we can tie them to that?
The best stories are ones in which the listener can see themselves in the story, right? They're co-creating the story with you. As they're listening, they're putting themselves in the story with you. And so as you're telling the story, the best stories actually almost kind of leave a spot for the listener, right? They leave a seat at the table. And so it's about, and if you can make that listener feel like they are connected to or similar to one of the characters in your story, then that's the very best way to make them feel a connection to what you're sharing with them. So, if I'm telling a story if I want you to come to work for me, right, I'm going to tell a story about someone like you who came to work for me and exploded, right, and just had enormous success. If I tell the story about somebody who's not like you, somebody who is already a version 3.0 of you, you're not going to resonate with it. So I need to know you, know enough about you that I can make my story and you kind of align.
Can you give us an example of what is your favorite story, Don? I mean, you got to have something that you really, really love. Is there something that sticks in your head?
Well, I'm often talking to people in groups who are in some level of dysfunction, right? They're facing some level of adversity. The economy is working against them. Regulation might be, maybe it's in the world of real estate, right? Maybe it's what's happening, at the highest levels of the industry that seem to make some things implode, right, or feel like they're imploding. And so, if you're talking about adversity, I love to tell a story about, and you and I have shared this story before, about Warwick Dunn, a college football player whose mother was shot and killed in a robbery at a bank. She was a police officer. He graduates from college as a football player. Makes his way to the NFL, but he starts buying homes for women like his mother, right? Single moms. He goes on, very successful NFL career, wins a big award called the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award. And he gets a chance to write a book, asked me to write it with him. And as we're writing the book, I ask him a question that led us to go to death row to meet the guy that killed his mom. And in that conversation on death row, Warwick actually forgave the man for what he had done. As we left the prison, he and I are talking about it. I'm like, "Where did you get that?" And he said, "You know what? My mother used to tell me many things, but the one thing she said most often Was it doesn't matter if you're white or you're black, doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor, doesn't matter if you're born on this side of the tracks or raised on that one. There's one thing we all have in common, and that is that there will be a moment that something will happen that will change the way you wake up the next morning. Adversity, something is going to challenge you in a way that will change the direction of your life. And in that moment, you could be bitter or you could become better. And as my son, I ask you to always be better. I tell that story, and then I start talking about, by the way, I get it. What's happening in your industry is tough. And guess what? You get to wake up tomorrow and choose, which will I be? Do I want to be bitter or better? And when you align yourself with Warwick Dunn, this guy that did this incredible thing and what is this incredible human, you start realizing that's a choice I can make. I can choose bitter or better, but it's a choice I must make because the default position will always be bitter. So anyway,
Wow.
It's a story. How I land it depends on where you are and what you're struggling with.
I'll tell you, there are key words that seem to resonate to me, and that I'm sure, different aspects resonate with different people. And first of all, it's very heart touching. The tragedy he went through with losing his mother. Her service to society and gave her life in doing so. I mean, how can you not be heartfelt in that moment? And then,
which keeps you riveted to the story, right? You know what? You're not checking out on that story because the guy is so like, you want to know what he does next. You're so, but in all of that, what I'm really wanting you to do is think about what you're going to do next. But I have to get you through to the end. And then I want you to see yourself as him. You're facing adversity too, just as he did. Make the choice, bitter or better. And again, bitter or better kind of becomes the money line, right? That's every good story kind of, you want to have a line that they can use as memorable. The number of organizations I've shared that story in who've actually put bitter or better up on the cafeteria wall in their, in their break room or whatever it is, there's quite a few. So the bottom line is that, again, stories, when there are a few habits of well-told stories that we can adapt to and adopt in our telling of them, we become better at it.
Amazing. I'll tell you, I had to research Warwick and see what he's up to. Apparently, he's donated 217 homes now to single moms.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, talk about somebody who...
I think the number is like 538 children woke up in a house this morning that they got to call their own because of him. Like,
is
that
it says it's up to 578 now.
578. Wow. So yeah. I'm off by 40 kids. But how growing. Amazing is that, right? Yeah. I have to look at his website all the time to try to figure out what his numbers are, because he constantly is in the process of changing lives of others. And there's something about him that we want to be like. So it works.
And he's been doing this for like 20 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a man who's dedicated his life to helping. And I mean, talk about just somebody who continues to shine in this world.
And it's crazy because most athletes, you and I both know many, who have had charities, the second their career is over, the charity kind of dwindles off, because now I'm on to the next guy and the next star, the next charity, right? And that's usually what happens. Most people, their attention to athletes kind of wanes after the athlete is no longer in a position of stardom, right? Warwick Dunn's charity grows in his absence from the league, which is really incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So many people have stories in them. They don't know how to discover those. Is there something that we should look for to understand our story?
Yeah. Adam, you know what? I hadn't planned to do this, but I'll send it to you if you'd like, and you can put it in show notes. But I actually have come up with a list of 45 questions that I think if you ask yourself, almost every one of these questions will lead you to a story you can tell. There are questions about, for example, hey, you work for this company and you could work anywhere else. Why? Why do you stay here? And tell me the answer to that question. And I know there's a story in there. Unless you tell me it's just the best paid company on the planet, that's pretty boring. But tell me the story about somebody you've served, whose life is better, whose life is better because you had a chance to be in service of them. Tell me about somebody you work with who absolutely you marvel at every time they show up, because they either have the right demeanor or they bring something to the workplace that you just don't find naturally. And as you start asking questions about other people and other things or moments in your life, you find those stories that you can tell that are that actually really do impact other people, because they shine a little light on who you are, but at the same time, you're reflecting on generally somebody else and something other than yourself. And that is a nice, humble way to tell a great story.
So when we're learning to tell our story, is there a certain process you go through, or a certain, way that you look at, is there a formula for a good story?
So I argue there's not, the best storytellers don't follow a formula, but they do have a certain series of habits of really well told stories that, and the two that I mentioned, know your audience and understand what your call to action is, are kind of two of the really best and most important habits. But yeah, I've kind of divined 10 habits of well-told stories. I've just been in the study of storytelling for the last 30 years, and I love getting in and talking about it.
Can you give us a few of those habits?
I actually have a workbook right here. So we turned. I actually do it as a little program now. I actually teach storytelling, and so yeah, it's really fun. I mean, you talk about the importance of every good story is uniquely yours. So it doesn't. In other words, if you want to tell a story, don't tell a story that somebody could find easily on Google. Make it somehow yours, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be your story. Like literally, somebody could tell Warwick Dunn's story after listening to this podcast between us. But what they'll say is, hey, I was listening to this awesome podcast and I heard this great story. What does it tell somebody, right? It tells somebody else that you're listening to something to get better. You're listening to a podcast to grow. And in the process, you learn this new skill set, right? You learn something about this guy that maybe made you think differently. So make the story uniquely yours, whatever the story might be. Use emotion. Emotion's an enormous piece of storytelling, but not all negative and not all positive. If you actually have to put people, depending on how long you take in the story, put them on a little bit of a roller coaster, right? You want them to be, excited, and then you want them to be, in some ways, touched by it, and in a way that allows them to feel like you just told them a 10-minute story and it felt like nothing. And so a roller coaster will take them there. The one that I would tell you is probably the most important is called reversing the I-U ratio. Most people tell stories that are, I did this, I did that. But that gets pretty boring and self-absorbed after a minute or two. So look at your story, and wherever you use the word I, see if there's a way to reverse it and say the word you. Instead of saying, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and looked down at the earth below me. What if you said, you could only imagine what it felt like to be at the top of the world's tallest mountain, looking down at all that's around you. See the difference in the way the two feel? Bringing you into the story makes my story better heard by you. And so reduce the I's, increase the U's, reverse the I-U ratio. So anyway, I'm just rattling off a few there. But
those are incredible points. It seems to me And
It's very thoughtful,
particularly,
though. Everything's very intentional. A really well told story is intentionally built. And I think that's important.
well, let me ask you this then, because it seems like a lot of business leaders do not have a good story.
They have a story, they just don't know how to tell it.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
How can we encourage that within an organization? Because people really don't connect. I mean, sure, there's a brand, but there has to be a story tied to the brand
Heck yeah.
and something holistic about that really ties your heart to the why of the organization.
Well, one of the questions on that list that I have is name something that your organization does for others. Like, is there a charitable arm of your organization that absolutely just touches your heart every time you talk about it, every time you think about it? What's out there about the organization that absolutely makes you wake up every day and go, man, I want more of that to happen. How do I do my part?
Have you seen any business leaders figure out their story?
Oh,
and
yeah.
create something transformative with that? What do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I was working with one just last week. GJ Hart, the CEO of Red Robin Restaurants, right? He's a turnaround CEO. He turned around California Pizza Kitchens.
Yep.
Is now at Red Robin, and but he can tell the story about the challenge he had becoming someone who could turn something around. And he tells this amazing story about being in the bathroom, shaving, looking at his wife and saying, you know what, I don't know that I can do this, during one of the dark days at California Pizza Kitchens. And his wife looking at him and saying, dude, shut up and go do it. People need you. People need you to lead. And he said it took his own wife to kind of reframe him, because all of us face those dark days, right? But him telling the story made him more human. He's the CEO. He's the boss. He's always on. But the truth is, he's telling you about this moment he's shaving and asking himself, do I have it in me? Which every one of us ask ourselves regularly. Everyone in the audience asks themselves regularly, do I have it in me today to do what I have to do to turn this around? And he said, I was blessed that I had somebody in my life, my wife, who could tell me, dude, quit whining. There are others who are depending on you. Go do what you know how to do because you're uniquely qualified. And by saying that, he's letting them know that he needed a cheerleader. He's also saying, by the way, I'm here today to be your cheerleader. I'm here today to remind you the next time you're shaving, the next time you're standing there, the next time you're asking yourself, do I have it in you? I'm here to say you do. It's just, I watched him and he's a masterful storyteller, because he brought himself, the CEO took himself down to the level that everyone in the audience could relate to. And then he shared a moment of humility, where his own wife had to set him straight, but he did it with a message that was aimed at them. It's powerful.
What's fascinating about this, Don, is, here's the reality is he wasn't like pulling puppies out of a burning building or anything like that, or winning the Super Bowl or anything of that nature. He's shaving and has self-doubt.
Right.
And he turns it into a captivating story. I mean, we've all got something like that in us.
Absolutely. Right. And some of us, like you, have pulled puppies out of buildings. So you're amazing. Your stories are better than all the rest of ours. Anyway,
thank you. I mean, I haven't written 12 New York Times bestsellers, but hey, we all have a great story in us. And I know, to turn ourselves into masterful storytellers, I think is a skill that is neglected in this day and age. When you look at the history of mankind, stories would be told on cave walls, and family stories and the rules of a tribe were told by storytellers to the new people in the tribe, or the people coming up in that tribe, in order to carry on the
generation
tradition.
knew what happened to them. Right.
Exactly. And now we have Google, and people suck at telling stories. So, I mean, this is a skill I think that leaders need to have. I mean,
They have to have it. I don't think you can lead effectively in this day and age, in a world in which emotional connection is required, right? Between those who lead and those they lead, right? Emotional connection is required. And you show your best connective tissue through story.
There you go. There's the punchline of the whole podcast, folks. I mean, it's the importance of this can't be overstated at all.
No, that's why you've been blogging about it for it seems like every other blog recently has been on storytelling.
It has, and storytelling and story building, and I think
Story building, right?
I mean, you tie both of them together so well because you teach us how to tell the story, but you teach us also how to build the story, and I think that's imperative. I've seen,
and then I think one thing that would be a really great next level of that is building a story bank, right? I think one of the things that I argue all the time is that any good storyteller should have 10 or so stories that they've actually thought enough through, actually created well enough. And as I said, like with the Warwick Dunn story, I can land that story in a lot of different places because your adversity is going to be different than mine or someone else's. So how do I tie what Warwick went through to your adversity to make you feel like the story was for you? First off, I have to know what your adversity is, right? That's know your audience. But the second part is I have to have the story built well enough, be able to tell it that I can end it with, you know what, just as Warwick had to deal with some level of, just as his mother said, adversity is promised to all of us. I mean, she probably couldn't have imagined what we're going through right now at, in the real estate industry. I'm just using, your homeland as a talking point, but the idea being where you go with it but having 10 or so really good stories in your bank allows you to, in the moment, pull out a really good story that you can use when required.
That's amazing. Build a story bank, folks.
Yeah.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
As we wrap up the show here, a lot of leaders come to stage with a self-deprecating story.
Mm.
It seemed, I did this, I did that, I screwed this up, I got caught in that, whatever it might be. I don't know what it is. I started telling one a while ago when I was a SWAT commander. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to connect better with the community because all I was doing is kicking doors and, running in and blowing things up and things like that. So I'm thinking, all right, I need to do a little community policing here and connect better. And I thought, I'm a big, tough SWAT guy, in my uniform and got my gun belt on and everything. And I see this kid standing in his front yard. It was actually in my neighborhood. And I'm leaving my neighborhood to go on duty in my police car. And I see this boy standing out there and he waves at me as I'm driving by and I wave at him and I stop and I get out and I walk over. I'm like, how you doing, son? He goes, great. I said, have you ever met a policeman before? He goes, no, I haven't. I said, well, it's nice to meet you. And he's like, thanks. And he goes, can I ask you a question? And I go, sure. And I'm like, this is great. Maybe this kid's going to tell me where there's a crack house or he's going to tell me what's going on. Or he's like, this is really secret. I'm thinking this is really good. And I bend over, I put my hands on my knees. I'm like, you can tell the police anything. He goes, anything? I go, yeah, anything. He goes, your fly's open. And like, I went from being 8 feet tall to about 2 inches tall there at that moment. But the humility that I learned at that moment, and it was fascinating because when I was introduced,
but that's such a great story because whatever room you're in front of, what often happens, especially if you're on a stage or in front of the room, the vision is you up here and we're down here, right? So by doing that, you just brought us eye to eye. You just made but you also could finish the story off by checking your fly and actually saying, just wanted to make sure that no one here had the same message for me. And that way you kind of have a little joke there. And then you get off then you take that story and it allows you to go almost anywhere you want to go, because now you're one of them, right? You're one of the audience. And that's awesome.
It's funny, but you know what freaks me out is going on stage and thinking, is my fly open? How do you check this?
No, I actually did an event with a Microsoft leader, and we were talking through teaching a story, how he could make himself, because he was kind of one of those people that everybody thought of him as quite distant, and he decided to share a story about being at that exact convention center where we were just a couple of years earlier, and he was on the phone. He was just, and everybody was imagining him. Yeah, that's the guy, right? He's so busy. But then he talks about, and I just had to go to the restroom. He goes, but I'm just, I'm locked in this conversation. It's so important. He says, but I make my way in the restroom and I'm looking around going, wow, when did they take the urinals out of the men's room? The entire room got it, right? But it allowed everybody to laugh at this guy in a moment. And it in many ways, it changed the dynamic of his presentation to the group. So yes, those kinds of moments when people of authority can offer something that brings them back down to earth, it's always good.
I love it. Don, this has been a wonderful conversation. I have a question I ask all of the great leaders on Start With a Win, and that's, how do you start your day with a win?
So for me, I think the most important thing I do in the morning, I love this, is that, when I'm at home, I get a chance to get a quick kiss before I get out of bed. My wife is always she's quite affectionate. I think that's really important. And in the morning, if I'm on the road, the very first thing I do is I always call my children, because I just love them to hear, no matter where I am, that the first and most important thing I think of is them. So it's a family connective moment for me. That's what my win is. And you probably got many that are far more deep and thoughtful than that, but mine is because I feel like I'm a late in life dad, so having a family for me is a win.
That's a huge blessing. And I'm glad you take the opportunity to do that. Don, you're a great human being and a great dad, and you're a great friend. It's an honor and a pleasure to know you. Everybody, make sure you check out Don Yaeger online, at Don Yaeger, at most of the socials. Of course, you can find his 12 New York Times bestsellers online. Also, I encourage you to
buy more books.
Buy more books. We need more people reading more often, folks.
I know, that's true. Don't just buy them, read them.
There you go. Read them, highlight them, put notes in them, things like that. We love it. So anyhow, Don, we appreciate all you do, my friend. It's great to see you again.
Adam, thank you. It never gets old. I love reading all your work and look forward to maybe the next time I get invited back.
There you go. I look forward to seeing you soon. And thanks for being on Start With a Win.